Hi, I'm Carol Falk. I began my association with the Mitchell Gallery back in the early 1990s when I was the art critic for the Capitol. Subsequently, I joined the board, but discovered that my real love was the art. And what I really liked was discussing it with people and helping them to be able to read it. Today, because of my personal interest in the Japanese aesthetic, I chose two Japanese prints to talk about. The two prints behind me were given to the gallery in 2004 by one of the first Black graduates of St. John's College, Martin Dyer. He died in 2011 at age 80. He was very philanthropic and had collected lots of African and Asian art. Japanese art goes back well over 2,000 years. Woodblock prints, not so much. They became popular in the 18th century, particularly when an Edo dynasty shogun decreed the sumptuary laws. It was really to keep down a burgeoning middle merchant class. So the sumptuary laws decreed that nobody but the aristocracy could own luxury goods. And in our case, that meant art. But human beings, being ever so creative, decided to collaborate to mass produce art that would be affordable, really cheap, because they sold for just a few pennies. They produced woodblock prints. The publisher would commission a print from an artist, and the artist would make an original one-off painting or drawing that was colored. At this point, the publisher would take it to an atelier, which was a studio of expert craftsmen. They would take the original piece, make a line drawing out of it, several line drawings, and then, since you needed several wood blocks, one for each color, would put the line drawing on the wood block, glue it, and then an engraver would take over, and he would cut away all the portions that were not meant to be painted. Then the print went to the printer, and the printer would process it in a printing press. And you could make as many prints as could be printed and not wear out the particular set of cherry wood blocks. It's very complex. They were printed onto paper, which was called washi. And this was important because original high art was painted on silk. And silk was very expensive, so they were made on paper. The prints depicted ukiyo-e, and that translates as pictures of the floating world or the passing scene. And it celebrates that burgeoning class of merchants, showing what they did in everyday life. And in the case of these two prints, they refer back to kabuki theater, which was a popular entertainment venue of the day. So what about these two? On the back of the frame, it's noted that the artist was Kunisada, who was a well-known artist in the mid-19th century in Edo, Japan, which is the present-day Tokyo. And of course, as the seat of government, the emperor lived there, it was the center of popular culture as well. Kunisada was, as I said, extremely prolific. And it became my task to look, thank goodness for the internet, and find these images so that I could give them some provenance. Well, I must have looked at, I'm not kidding, like 1,000 images. And I was becoming disappointed that I didn't find either of these two. So I thought, I guess I better find out what they say. So I called one of my old friends, Ann Yonemura, who is the recently retired curator of Japanese art at the Freer and Sackler, the Asian art museums of the Smithsonian, and asked her to take a look at the images. So there was a huge discovery by Ann that she elaborated to me, and it's a good thing I was sitting down, and she said, these prints were not designed by Kunisada, who was a Tokyo-based artist, but rather by an Osaka City-based artist in the mid-19th century, whose name was Hokuei. And she said, Hokuei did these two prints between 1824 and 1837 when he died. So the information on the prints was completely erroneous, and we had to establish a new provenance. Both of these prints are extraordinarily bright and colorful. They both really do illustrate the Japanese aesthetic. They're minimal, they're densely patterned, bold color, calligraphic marks are evident. But let's look at this one specifically. The upper embellished cartouche, which the artist made part of the landscape, tells us the name of the actor, Tomojiro, in his role as Tomaki. And I say he because remember, male actors were acting as females. And you can tell he's a male actor because there's a headband across his forehead which hides the male hairline. His eyes are obviously crossed, and that's no mistake because that's a metaphor for a comedic role. He's dressed in a gorgeous kimono with patterns juxtaposed, and there's a sword right behind him. Over here on the right, we see the publisher's seal, which has been engraved, as well as Hokuei's signature. And note how incredible these engravers had to be to approximate fluid calligraphy, which was written with a very thin brush and ink, and lots of practice. It's interesting to note that this one has grass. It's not completely keyed because the grass comes over some of the kimono, which is kind of interesting. And notice that the forms are flattened. The focus is on the foreground figure, and the background just serves as an interesting negative space shape. Let's switch over to this one. The second print depicts a night scene of an actor holding an umbrella in a lightning storm. Here's the publisher's seal, the artist's signature, and can you see that the signature is the same? And you can see that the lightning is very definitively inscribed, and they form strong diagonals which help lead the eye around the print. As well, note that the raindrops cross the lightning. So this is very carefully composed. This is a little bit unusual because it has some shading in it, and normally they're sort of black and white, no shading. In this one, there's a lack of any background detail because the flattened foreground figure is the most salient aspect. And this area of calligraphy tells about the actor, whose name was Recon. He was very popular, used quite a bit by Hokeway during his time. And it tells about the play. After Japan was opened up to the West in 1854 by Commander Perry, trade goods started to be exported to the West, and a craze for anything Eastern happened. It was called Japonisme in French. The prints were often, because they were so cheap, were often used to wrap up export goods, such as, the ceramics or the paintings on silk. Famous artists of the day, Degas, Whistler, Van Gogh, began to collect these prints. And you can often see in their work how it influenced them. So, wow. In a culture where the calligraphic stroke of the brush was considered the highest form of art, the success of these prints is to be judged on how well they reproduce that. That's it, folks.